Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. A US federal judge has overturned an asylum policy recently implemented by President Biden, dealing a blow to his administration's efforts to bring migration across the southern US-Mexico border under control. Paddy Maguire reports.
The judge in California ruled that Mr. Biden's 10-week-old policy to force asylum seekers to apply for admission to the US from their home countries or from countries en route to the United States was unlawful. With the new regulation blocked, the US government may now have to accept asylum claims from people who cross illegally from Mexico into US territory, prompting concerns about a new surge in clandestine border crossings. US officials say migrant detentions have plummeted since the new policy took effect in May, as more people try to enter the US legally. The Biden administration has 14 days to appeal.
A court in Belgium has convicted 6 men of murder for their role in Islamist bombings in Brussels in 2016. 32 people were killed and hundreds injured when a subway train and Brussels airport were targeted by suicide bombers. Paul Kirby has more.
There were 10 people on trial and 6 men have been convicted of terrorist murder and attempted murder and terrorist association belonging to a terrorist group. Now, chief among these 6 are Salah Abdeslam and Mohamed Abrini. Salah Abdeslam was the only survivor of the Paris attacks in November, just 4 months before the Brussels bombings. He fled to Brussels immediately after the Paris attacks. So he's been found guilty of that. He actually denied any involvement at all in the Brussels bombings because he was arrested just a few days earlier.
President Biden has announced the creation of a national monument to Emmett Till, a black teenager whose lynching in the 1950s consolidated the civil rights movement. The 14-year-old was tortured, murdered, and his body dumped in a river in Mississippi after a white shopkeeper said he'd whistled at her. Here's Vice President Kamala Harris on why the monument is important.
We know that we must remember and teach our full history, even when it is painful, especially when it is painful. Today, there are those in our nation who would prefer to erase or even rewrite the ugly parts of our past. Those who attempt to teach that enslaved people benefited from slavery. Those who insult us in an attempt to gaslight us.
Ghana's parliament has abolished the death penalty after it passed the Criminal Amendment Offences Act 2022. There are currently 170 men and 6 women on death row, whose death sentences will now be replaced with life imprisonment. This is the world news from the BBC. There's been another day of intense heat in many countries around the Mediterranean, with wildfires continuing to rage. In Greece, 2 pilots died when their plane crashed as it battled fires on the island of Evia near Athens. On the Italian island of Sicily, Palermo Airport was briefly closed as smoke and flames closed in from the surrounding countryside. And in Algeria, the emergency services are still fighting to contain fires that have now killed at least 34 people. The tech giants Alphabet and Microsoft, which have both recently made a big push into artificial intelligence, have announced bigger than expected earnings for the second quarter of the year. Alphabet, which owns Google, reported a net income of $18.7 billion. An earnings statement by Microsoft said net profit was $20.1 billion for the April to June period. That's up 20% year on year. Bronny James, the eldest son of the basketball legend LeBron James, is in a stable condition after suffering a cardiac arrest during practice with his college basketball team. Camilla Mills has the story.
A spokesperson for the family said the 18-year-old collapsed on court while training in Los Angeles on Monday. Bronny was treated by medical staff before being taken into intensive care. The family have asked for respect and privacy at this time. LeBron James is the NBA's all-time leading scorer and has long spoken of his desire to extend his career so he can play in the league with his son. Some analysts have already marked Bronny as a likely top 10 selection in the 2024 NBA draft.
A major security operation is taking place in Ecuador to free prison guards who've been taken hostage by inmates in a number of prisons. The Interior Minister said the security forces had begun taking control of the jails. They'd suffered a wave of violence between criminal gangs over the weekend. And that's the latest BBC News.